the harmony of flavors under the pale hour before dawn. The clan's courtyard breathed a slow, deliberate silence. Lanterns swayed like careful thoughts. A thin mist braided itself through tiled eaves and pooled around the stone well. Old Master Liang stood at the kitchen's threshold, sleeves rolled to the elbow, palms browned from years of tending embers. He held a handful of fragrant herbs as a calligrapher studies a brushstroke, not for novelty, but for integrity. The day's meal, he believed, was a compact philosophy: color, aroma, taste, and seasoning arranged as though they were argument and counterargument in a measured discourse. Villagers rose to the rhythms of season and pot. A scholar returning from the capital sought not to resume examinations, but to recover an art he feared had grown ephemeral in city bustle. He asked Liang whether the secret lay in exotic spices or elaborate ritual. Liang only smiled and handed him a wooden spoon darkened by decades of stirring. Balance, he said, is not a codified rule but a cultivated appetite for nuance. The 5 distinct sensations, sweet and sour, bitter and astringent, and the subtle middle note we rarely name, must each find their place without overwhelming the others. Liang taught by making the invisible visible. He led the scholar to the market. Heaps of citrus perfumed the air with honest sharpness. Crates of fermented beans whispered of patient summers. Glinting jars of preserved plums promised concentrated sunlight. Each ingredient carried provenance: river fish from the northern bend, winter wheat from terraces above the valley, soy aged within clay jars. Liang traced those origins with a reverence bordering on liturgy. A dish bears not only its seasonings, but the history that rendered them, he said. To taste is to read a small ledger of place and time. The scholar learned to listen to food as he had once listened to texts, to parse structure and attend to cadence. He noted the alchemy of heat, how warm oil coaxed the herbs into perfume, how a slow simmer softened the stubbornness of marrow, how a sudden char translated sugar into a philosophical accent. Labor in the kitchen became discourse. The pot's simmer was a thoughtful pause between sentences. Neighbors drifted in while they cooked, bringing small offerings: a handful of wild greens, a jar of preserved ginger, a slab of firm tofu like an argument awaiting proof. Meals were communal experiments, drafts upon which the village amended its moral grammar. Children learned by watching, their small hands folding dumpling skins as if enclosing a consoling proverb. Conversation at the long wooden table measured itself like the meal, observations balanced with jokes, austerities with indulgent recollections. Even disagreement was served with relish, tempered by broth and thyme. Liang taught that flavors mirror the human condition. Bitterness sharpens discernment. Sweetness lubricates compassion. Acidity cuts through complacency. Astringency returns one to humility. If you banish bitterness, he said, you dull judgment. If you flee sweetness, you forfeit tenderness. With simple metaphors, he articulated a doctrine of equilibrium, a life tuned to resist extremes, attentive to the small harmonies that reconcile divergent tastes. One evening, a storm found the hamlet. Rain hammered the roof like impatient drums, and the courtyard filled with the scent of damp wood. The day's harvest, already prepared, gathered around the table like comrades sheltering together. The scholar reflected on how weather, hunger, and the market's timing, factors beyond individual will, determined what was available for a meal, and therefore how the meal shaped the day's mood. He realized that agency is often exercised inside constraints. Artistry flourishes not in total freedom, but in the responsible navigation of limitation. As years folded, the scholar's hands learned what his intellect had once only admired. He tempered his theories with practice, measured handfuls of salt by intuition rather than by abstract proportion. He began to teach apprentices who arrived with bright ideas and untested patience. He insisted they notarize the mundane: how much water softened beans to the right resilience. The precise instant garlic relinquished its rawness. Rituals emerged not from superstition, but from accumulated fidelity to results. Thus, craft stitched together individual vintages of experience into durable communal knowledge. The courtyard continued to change with the seasons. New faces arrived, bringing unfamiliar spices that expanded the village's vocabulary of taste. Sometimes an ingredient unsettled the balance and invited creative solutions. A tang from a stranger's citrus led to discovering that a pinch of toasted sesame calmed the palate and brightened the broth. Innovation here was incremental, collaborative, and patient, a process in which curiosity met restraint. On festival mornings, the table brimmed with deliberate abundance, layers of steamed buns, platters of candied fruit, bowls fragrant with simmered stock. Yet Liang's teaching endured. People ate with the awareness that a meal was both indulgence and instruction. They honored plenty without letting it erode the discipline that had nurtured scarcity into savor. The scholar, now both custodian of taste and letters, wrote a small treatise on culinary temperance, not a manual of recipes, but a meditation on living by balancing the sour with the sweet, the sharp with the soft. In time, the clan's kitchen became a locus where humility and aspiration conversed. Young apprentices learned to fold more than dough. They learned to fold impulses into patient practice. The community continued, season after season, to gather and remake itself around the simple act of breaking bread. The lesson remained unchanged: to be adept at taste, as at life, is to keep one's hands steady and one's heart open, so that the many flavors of existence, bitter, sweet, sour, astringent, and the unnamed center, may find concord and, in doing so, teach us how to balance. Vocabulary: gastronomy, the art or science of good eating. Culinary practice and study. The village's reputation for refined gastronomy attracted students from the surrounding valleys. Alchemy, a seemingly magical process of transformation or creation. The slow ferment felt like alchemy, converting humble beans into a sauce that carried memory. Convivial, friendly, lively, and enjoyable. Sociable. The evening meal was convivial, full of laughter and earnest debate. Equilibrium, a state of balance between opposing forces. He sought an equilibrium between austerity and indulgence in both diet and disposition. Provenance, the place or source of origin, where something comes from. They prized the tea for its provenance, knowing it grew on a particular misty slope. Meticulous, showing great attention to detail. Very careful and precise. Her meticulous slicing ensured each piece released its aroma at the exact right moment. Ephemeral, lasting for a very short time. Transient. The morning light on the dumplings was ephemeral, gone as the sun rose higher. Sensibility, the capacity to appreciate and respond to complex emotional or aesthetic influences. His culinary sensibility had been sharpened by years of attentive listening to elders. Umami, a pleasant savory taste. One of the 5 basic tastes. A touch of fermented bean added umami that deepened the broth's character. Austerity, sternness or severity of manner or life. Simplicity and frugality. Austerity in the kitchen taught them to value restraint as much as resourcefulness. Temperance, moderation or self-restraint in action or thought. Their practice of temperance meant sharing even when provisions were modest. Discernment, the ability to judge well. Acute insight. Years of tasting had honed his discernment to detect a single oversalted grain in a vast pot. Provenient, originating from a particular source or place. Provenient. The peppers were provenient from a distant plateau, bringing an unfamiliar brightness. Concord, agreement or harmony between people or things. Through patient negotiation of flavors, the chefs achieved a pleasing concord in each course.